Hello, it's Chaplain 73 here. You're joining me again for another interview. Today I'm with the artist Allan Storer. Hello, Allan. How are you?
Hi there. Hi. Hi, Darren.
I will start by asking the question that I always start with. Tell us a bit about who you are, what you do, and where you're based.
Well, I'm Allan Storer, and I'm an impasto abstract artist. When I say impasto, it means I paint a lot in heavy oils and thick lashings of heavy oil paint. I paint with a squeegee or palette knives. This is one of my palette knives I've been using on this painting here today. It's a very small painting by comparison to the ones I use. Sometimes I use biggies like that. Yeah. And in fact, the squeegee I use is about 6 feet high. Wow. And probably about 18 inches wide. I could get it, but it's probably a bit too big. And that's when I paint the big paintings, which could be anything from 6 feet square upwards. I've painted, I think the largest painting I've ever done is 24 feet high, by about 8 feet wide. Wow. And that went into a show home from McAlpine in Chelsea. And that took some doing. I paint mainly in St Ives and London. In the St Ives, I'm represented in the Art House Gallery, and in London by various interior designers. I'm in a couple of art galleries up here, Wycliffe Art Gallery. I'm in the, just trying to think of, No Naked Walls down in Surrey. And I've got an exhibition coming up next year in the Mayfair Gallery, Knightsbridge Hay Hill Gallery. So that's sometime next year. And so what do I do basically apart from that? Well, the interior design stuff is, I very rarely meet my customers actually, because I sell mainly through the interior designers, and right. Even in the galleries, I hardly ever meet my customers. So I feel a little bit sort of distanced from my work and from the customer. Yeah. And painting is really, it's quite a lonely profession, really. And as you can see, I'm sitting in my studio now. I'm usually by myself. I do have an assistant now and then. And these are usually younger people who are possibly students of art and so forth, and they come along and help me. And they do all the mixing of the paints and hopefully clean up after me. Because painting oils, one of the main problems in painting, or well, the way I paint, is keeping clean. Yeah. And because I paint with an impasto and I'm painting big paintings, I'm using a lot of paint. And usually I would buy my paint in 2.5 litre tins. Yeah. And I only use the primary colours. So we've got three primaries, and then a white and possibly a black now and then, but it's not good practice to buy tube or manufactured black. We should be able to create our own. So you can imagine when I'm doing a squeegee painting with a 6-foot squeegee, which is probably 18-inch wide, my palette is my table. Yeah. And the table is can be anything up to 10 feet long. And that would have 3 mega palettes on. And I just basically bathing in oil paint, getting very sort of high up it all, Because we have a lot of terps involved, and other materials. So I don't need an awful lot of whiskey or afterwards to make me merry. You know, I'm halfway there. I'm based, as I said earlier, I'm based in London and St Ives. In St Ives, I sell mainly, and I've been selling down in St Ives possibly for 15 years or maybe more, 20. I did start painting in St Ives back in the 1960s at the latter end, but it wasn't anything really official with galleries. You know, I just go down there and we'd be on the wall outside the sloop and on the pier, and you know, basically it was a sort of hippie era. You know,
yeah.
Some people sold beads and stuff, but I just played along there. But I wasn't. I wasn't a natural hippie. I'd like to have been one, but I was a sort of pseudo hippie. But although I loved St Ives, I loved being there. I couldn't stay there all the time because, especially back then, because there wasn't an awful lot of money there, and I needed to sort of hit the city. You know, I like the city as well as the country. But that's the time, the 60s and 70s, when a lot of famous artists or well-known artists today, they were down there. Then people like Terry Scott and people like, not Terry Scott, sorry. It is Terry Scott. Terry Frost. I was thinking of Terry Scott, the actor.
Terry Frost, yeah.
And Terry Frost and Roy Ray. Roy Ray went down in the 70s and people like that. I knew Sven Berlin quite well, and he had quite a few. No, I didn't know Sven Berlin. Sorry, no, I knew Hyman Siegel.
Hyman Siegel. Yeah.
I read a lot about Sven Berlin. No, I knew Hyman Siegel quite a lot, and he had quite a few sort of charcoal portraits of St Ives fishermen hanging in the lounge bar of the sloop. And so there's a whole host, Colin Orchards, and I've known for quite a long time down there. And I teach, don't I? I'm in my studio here. And I teach probably, I was running quite big, large classes at one time before COVID.
Yep.
With an art shop in Kingston. And we'd probably have, once a fortnight, we'd have classes of 19. And what I do now is I teach probably 2 or 3 people at a time. We're trying obviously to keep social distancing and aware of all the prohibitions of COVID, and obviously we haven't been teaching for a couple of months at the moment because of the lockdown. But we're going to get back there in May, and I'll be teaching again then, 2 or 3 people. We try and do it every day. It's quite a long week because whereas we could do the big classes before, I can only do 2 or 3 at a time now.
Yeah.
More labour intensive, but it's a better service for the student because they get more one-to-one attention. So they're getting quite good value really. But I don't mind because I just enjoy it as well. And as I was saying earlier on about it being a solitary job, being a painter, is that having people in and teaching and talking to them about art, that is and that adds another dimension to it all, more sociable aspect of it. And I do think art should be a sociable thing to do. You know, I don't think in all this. I don't believe in the artist hidden away in his garret painting in poverty. My influences, one of my first influences when I began painting was the Welsh artist. Cuffin Williams, Sir Cuffin Williams, right. And he used to paint massively with his palette knife, thick, heavy oils. And I love the way he painted monotone colours. And you can see it when you see, if you know the work of Cuffin and you know Snowdonia in North Wales, then you can almost feel you can feel it in his paint. You know, it's so recognisable.
Yeah.
I also like Maggie Hamblin as an artist. She also does a lot of thick oil work, and especially her sea paintings, lovely thick lushes of oil. Again, I don't know whether she uses a palette or brush, palette knife or brush. Cuffin Williams definitely used a palette knife.
Just as a matter of interest, Alan, how long does it take these paintings to dry?
Well, it can take anything. It depends. Obviously, it depends on the thickness of the paint, but it could take. I wouldn't like to say one of these paintings here is safe to touch for at least 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So it'll become manageable that you can walk around with it and probably touch the surface after 2 weeks, but you can't really push or prod or exert any pressure on it, because it'll probably take about 4 weeks,
right,
5 weeks to dry at this thing. If you paint it very thinly with oils, then they do dry a lot quicker. But they do say that it takes 60 years for an oil painting to dry.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I've often wondered. I've seen these paintings done with the oils in the way that you're talking about. You know, with the thick layers of paint on them, and I've often wondered how long they take to actually dry. So I just thought I'd ask you, because obviously.
Yeah. Well, of course, an acrylic painting dries almost immediately.
Yeah.
But you can be in trouble.
I've never been brave enough to try oils.
No. You can be in trouble with acrylic because it dries so quickly.
Yeah.
And you don't get the organic quality that you can sort of blend, or the organic thing isn't quite there with acrylics. But they're very good if you make a mistake with acrylics, then you can wait for it to dry and paint over it.
Yeah.
Whereas with oil, you can't do that. So if you make a mistake with oil, you either have to scrape it off and start again, or you have to mix into the original. And that's what gives it that sort of chance. Sometimes when you do that, you get all sorts of lovely results. For instance, with these paintings here, which I do with the squeegee, a lot of that is to do with wet paint on top of wet paint.
Yeah.
And as I said, I just said earlier on, a chance outcome. And sometimes the colours work, and you have to be very careful. It's quite a skill really to get the colours to be clean when you're painting wet on wet.
Yeah.
Because you could end up with what we call mud. And so that's can you pick that up? So you could end up with mud, you know.
Yeah.
So that's the skill in painting wet on wet. But I was going to sort of when you were talking about how quickly does it take to dry. Interesting artist really is Frank Arbach.
Yeah.
And he paints very, very thickly wet on wet. And his paintings, it can be that thick. You know, I've seen, he painted David Bowie, portrait of David Bowie. And I think literally the paint surface is like that. And David Bowie, he was almost skull-like. And he also painted a lot of View of Primrose Hill and places like that. Yeah. And you have to stand way back to recognise what it is, or have any idea. The interesting thing with Frank Arbach, I read somewhere that when he takes his paintings take years to dry, And when he takes them to a gallery, he has to have them in a glass frame.
Oh, right.
And so no one can touch them. So, you know, so there are special little glass boxes, and apparently the galleries have to sit with them in glass boxes. That's a story I heard. Of course, Frank Auerbach is a fascinating character. He does a lot of life painting, and his sitters have been known to sit for him on regular days of the week for up to 30 years, you know.
Wow.
So I've gone off cue there.
No, it's absolutely fine. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Frank Auerbach, I am actually quite familiar with his work. So
Yeah.
He was one of the artists that was going around in my head when you were saying about using thick paints. I was thinking of his.
Well, he's a chap, I assume. I don't, and also his oil is very textured.
Yeah.
And it's very lumpy. And also because he puts so much oil on, it will, it congeals, doesn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes, you can always tell with a painting, so not cracked, what's the word I'm thinking? Shrivels up. If a painting has got a load of oil on it, it'll sort of have like little veins on the surface, it shrivels up a bit. Now with a Frank Auerbach, you don't care about that because everything is all part of the painting.
Mm-hmm.
And on some of my work, it is part of the work too. But if you're trying to do a very sort of paint in the classical style and do a very fine piece of work, then you don't want that at all. It means that you've put your top surface on over a bottom layer which hasn't quite dried, you know.
Yeah.
And if the bottom layer, if the top surface dries out before the bottom layer does, then the top surface will crack.
Mm-hmm.
But when you layer it on like I do, it's all part of it. And it also gives it quite a bit of character. And so what I'm doing when I'm painting abstract, that doesn't mean it's any easier though, because the problem is with painting like this, especially with the palette knife, and you just put in the paint on, you're not, and it's abstract, or it's all abstract really, although that would look like the sea and the breaking waves, but it's not representational. So the idea is the feeling of it rather than the appearance.
Yeah.
So the whole painting is the image itself. So I'm not painting a particular thing. I'm not painting that wave, or I'm not painting that house, because I'm not telling the viewer of my work what to think. I'm letting them interpret it themselves. And if they can identify the emotion, the energy, or the feeling that I've put in it, or it may be their own interpretation of it, then the painting is speaking to them. Whereas if for instance, we painted a house, you're just saying, and you put that up on your wall, you said, oh, that's a nice painting of a house. It may be very good, technically excellent, but every time you look at it, you're going to see a house.
Yeah.
And in a way, the painter is telling you, I don't want to go too deep into this argument with representation art versus abstract. But with abstract art, you're being given the freedom to think what you want, to interpret the painting the way you want to. No one's telling you that's that. And with this one, for instance, it can be anything. I've had people say, oh, they look like Monets, or oh, I can see swans. And I said, oh, yeah. And then I look closely and I can see swans. And in fact, I've got one. I've got one of my own collection, and my father thought it was a cocker spaniel.
Brilliant.
I don't know. And then I had to look at it really hard, and then he showed me he said, well, there's the eye, there's the big ear, there's the nose.
Yeah, yeah. We do have this. I know when I was young, I used to like look at patterns on curtains, and I'd make
Yeah.
faces out of them of like dragons' faces or whatever. You know, we have that ability in our brain to interpret certain elements of colours and shapes to mean what we want them to mean, don't we? So that is the joy of abstract. That's why I like abstract art. I mean, I love looking at abstract art. My wife is very much somebody who likes to look at a painting and know what it's a painting of. But I
Yeah.
like to look at a painting that sometimes leaves a lot to the imagination, and I think abstract always does that. So what advice would
when
you...
you were saying, interesting, when you said about looking at the curtains and seeing shape,
Mhm.
that's quite a surreal image, really, because
Yeah.
there's an surrealist artist in the Second Manifesto, Max Ernst,
Mhm.
and that's exactly, well, Salvador Dali followed that technique, and Salvador Dali called it critique, paranoia critique,
Yeah.
something like that. But what Max Ernst did, he looked at he saw the floorboards, and he could see images in the floorboards,
Yeah.
and then he copied them with chalk paper and charcoaled over it, created the image, and then he made that image into his work.
Yeah.
Called it inspiration to order, and also it's a thing we call objective chance. The surrealists called it chance encounters. And whereas the old, in the first wave of surrealism, they wanted their dreams to interpret their dreams, which they found very difficult because consciousness always intervened and they couldn't reach that unconscious area.
Yeah.
So what they did with Max Ernst, he waited for these chance encounters, and he looked at the floor and said, "Oh, I can see a little bird there." And one of it is alter ego was Lop Lop. And he manufactured that from little shapes in the floorboards. And he called it his frottage and grattage approach. So what you said there, that was a surreal, meaningful, that was the, and that's it. That's how a lot of the second wave of surrealists did that. That's how they got their imagery from, looking at things like what they saw in the curtains and so forth.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
What advice would you like to go back and give your younger self about art?
I was young. Well, I think if I was young, well, I would just go and be an artist straight away.
Right.
I would go to straight off, go to art college and do it. The only problem is that a lot of art colleges don't run painting courses now. No. Or they do I think I call this a lot of sort of navel gazing, where they go there for self-discovery. Mm-hmm. And they're not taught the basic skills of painting. But they're doing a lot of work with I don't know, what would you call it, IT work or stuff like that. Computers are playing a major part in art now. And unfortunately, oil painting isn't the top of the art school's agenda. And there's an awful lot of kids go off to art college now, and they are very disappointed because they don't spend as much time painting and learning the techniques of the old masters, for instance. That they would like to. And unfortunately, you probably have to go abroad to Italy or somewhere like that. I know a lot of, you go to the National Portrait Gallery, to the BP Awards, once a year, I think, and you notice that these young artists, a lot of them have trained in places like Florence, in fine art, because we don't teach. It's very difficult to get a fine art or a skill in painting in a British art college now.
Right.
So, but yes. So yes, if I was launched, I would be absolutely. If I was going in for art now, and if I wanted to be an artist, I think yes, I would definitely go for it. But I would be very careful of what the college had to offer me. I just wouldn't go to an art college. If I wanted to be a painter, I'd be very sort of I think, well, it's pointless going to an art college. It isn't going to teach me to paint.
Yeah, yeah.
So I probably wouldn't go. I'd probably go and do something else, because I don't know a lot about digital art or anything like that. A lot of worthwhile art is created digitally, but that's a new era, isn't it? And
yeah,
I don't want to knock that either, because it's all art, it's all creativity. But I do know a lot of people like painting in oils or painting in acrylic, and a lot of them are very sort of sorry they don't take it up. But when you said, what would I do? You know, obviously there is the big debate, should I do something and get a proper job? And I know I've got enough money to pay a mortgage or something. But it's a shame that today, you know, we're living in a time when we have become such a material nation or species, if you like, that we put money above our heart's desire, if you like. You know? And that's the society that we've created, and that's the society that we can contribute to. So if more people said, I want to be an artist and I'm going to go off to art college, then we'd probably take a big stab at the material culture, and it wouldn't work. You know, we could all be artists.
Yeah. So moving on to the next question. If you could spend 24 hours with another artist, living or dead, you've got a time machine now, you can go back in time if you want to. Who would you choose and what would you do?
Well, there's so many artists that I would like to know and experience time with. But the obvious one, I think, for me would be a female artist and a surrealist artist named Leonora Carrington. And she rose to prominence at the beginning of the last century. And she was the daughter, basically, of the Carrington Mills. She came from a very wealthy family, but she didn't quite fit in.
Mm-hmm.
She probably had she's probably had ADHD or something like that, I don't know. Right. But she just couldn't take school seriously. She rebelled against her parents, upset them tremendously because they were society people. And she was quite, she could see the sort of shallowness, if you like, of that high society they were trying to push her into. And she rebelled against it. So nowadays, they'd probably try and give her tablets or something and get her to behave herself. But they didn't in those days. She came from a very rich family. She rebelled against them. And she went off and ran away with Max Ernst and ended up in France. She experienced the Second World War. Max Ernst was interred. And then, of course, and she had a massive nervous breakdown. But it was a period, you know, when we had Freud very much. His presence was felt very much in art, especially with the surrealists. And she joined the female surrealists. And of course, the female surrealists didn't really agree with the male surrealists, and they didn't really like Freud at all. You know, they objected to him big time. And they took the side of Freud's what do you call it? Well, of his
nemesis.
Nemesis, yeah, Jung.
Jung, yeah.
And of course, Jung provided a much more positive idea of womanhood, female, so forth. And there was, I think it was Eric Newman who wrote did a lot of research with Mother Earth, or the Great Mother. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that band of female surrealists, to which Leonora Carrington belonged, sorted out surrealism, you know, from a feminine point of view, mm-hmm. and from the male point of view. They didn't run away with Freud's big ego, sort of masculine ego.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
what Freud called his bulwark of sexuality.
Hmm.
But yes, so Carrington took a stand there, and then she became a very successful artist, and wrote poetry, and she did a bit. She did a runner from France. I think her and Max Ernst split up, which wasn't surprising because most of the surrealists did.
Hmm.
And she knew other female surrealists, like Eileen Agar, Finney, Leonora Finney. There's a whole host of them. And they were very much fighting their corners against the male surrealists. And she went over to Mexico. She had an arranged marriage to get her into Mexico or America. And then that split up again. Then she married a partner there. She settled down in Mexico. She became one of Mexico's most famous artists. She died a couple of years ago.
All right.
So I thought she was a fascinating character. She had lots of guts, and she fought the system. And very, very interesting, you know. She was. Then what else I could say about her? I'm saying lots about her, actually.
She's not somebody that I've heard of before, so I'm going to go away and look into her because she sounds very fascinating from what you've said, and you've definitely sold her to me. So I'm going to go.
Well, I do give talks on Leonora Carrington. Done a few talks over the years, and her relationship with surrealism and male surrealism as a backdrop, you know.
Yeah.
Because it's out there, you know, Freud versus Jung, men versus women, and the idea of the positive idea of what it is to be feminine, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know how she would fare with modern day feminism, but the idea was they were definitely proud to be women.
Yeah.
And to I don't want to dig a hole here.
Well, we'll move on to the next question then. Question 5. The last question. What's in store for the future? Do you have anything that you're working on or planning that you could share with us? I know you've already mentioned Mayfair and Hay Hill, was it?
Yeah. Well, basically that's what I'm doing now. But I'm constantly selling my work anyway because I'm selling. Selling in St. Ives all the time. So I'm there every year. And sometimes when I go down, I go out on the beach playing air, you know, in St. Ives.
Yeah, yeah.
So I quite like that because that's like being a good old-fashioned artist. You know, you paint it on the beach and then you put it in the gallery and it sells. Yeah. So yes, I'll be down there. Fingers crossed, we'll be there this summer, and I'll be painting thereabouts and putting my paintings into the art house gallery.
I'm in Truro, which is not too far away. So if you're down that way, let me know and I'll.
Yeah, well, I'll text you.
Yeah,
send you a little email. You're in Truro. That's
yeah.
interesting. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. And then what else am I doing? Oh, well, I've got a few commissions on the go. I don't want to share that. It's one I'm very much behind time with, so I've got to sort that out quick. And yes, at the Hay Hill, it's sort of ongoing really because I don't do one-man exhibitions. As such, I'd rather have 1 or 2 paintings in galleries.
Yeah.
And have a little trickle. And then you don't have all the sort of stress of running having one big exhibition. Might be good for the ego, you know, to see your name plastered all over a window. But if you don't sell anything, it's not good on the bank balance, is it?
No, definitely not.
So it's nice to keep quite a low profile and keep selling one's work, I think. And just that little trickle.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, so I suppose I'll just keep on painting. I think it was Mary Fedden. She was painting till she was way into her 90s. And the interviewer said, well, why are you still painting in your 90s? And she said, well, what else can I do? I think that's a sort of good thing for an artist, you know. I think that's how, well, what else can I do?
Yeah.
And why do I do it? Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Why do people feel the need to paint? Why do they feel they have to?
Yeah.
My mother's 97, and she still paints, and not so much now, but she's done quite a lot over the years. And she probably was one of the reasons where I got my artistic leanings from. But yeah, you just sort of fizzle out, you know. I think Lucian Freud was painting right up until a couple of nights before he died, you know.
Yeah.
And the other one was Francis Bacon, you know, who was painting and partying.
Yeah.
That was the best of both worlds. Yeah, I think you just sort of carry on and no major big plans.
Yeah. I think if I get to 97, I hope to still be painting. So yeah, I see entirely where you're coming from.
Yeah.
That's a great note to end the interview on. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and telling me a lot more about your process and what it is you do, and give me a much more of an insight into oil painting and abstract painting. It's been fascinating.
Okay, Darren.
Thank you very much. And if you like what you've heard today, please subscribe to my channel below by hitting the subscribe button just below where this video is playing, and then you'll be able to catch up with me talking to other artists in the coming weeks and months, and you'll be the first to hear about any interviews that I'm doing. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Alan, and thank you everybody for listening and watching.